The Invisible Witness, How a Hospital Camera Toppled a $800,000 Betrayal. The air in room 412 was thick with the scent of antiseptic and fading hope. I lay skeletal against the bleached white sheets, my breathing shallow and labored. My niece, Vanessa, wasn't holding my hand for comfort. She was gripping my wrist, forcing a heavy fountain pen into my trembling fingers. I'm Martha Reynolds, and at 73 years old, I never imagined my final days would be filled with such terror. The cancer had ravaged my body over the past 6 months, leaving me weak and confused. The morphine drip kept the worst pain at bay, but it also left my mind foggy and vulnerable. Vanessa leaned closer, her breath hot against my ear. "Sign it, Auntie," she hissed, her voice a sharp contrast to the gentle hum of the heart monitor beside my bed. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my papery skin as she positioned the pen in my shaking hand. I could barely focus on the document in front of me. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, making my eyes water and my head pound with a dull, persistent ache. My eyes struggled to read the words on the page. Revised estate distribution was printed at the top in bold letters. Through my medication-induced haze, I tried to understand what was happening. This wasn't the will I'd carefully prepared with my lawyer, the one that left everything to the Children's Hospital and my son, Leo, who was serving overseas in the military. "If you don't sign this, I'll tell the nurses to stop the morphine," Vanessa threatened, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You'll die in pain alone. No one will be here to hold your hand. No one will care." Tears welled in my eyes, not from physical pain, but from pure terror. The thought of dying in agony, without relief, without dignity, was more than I could bear. My hand trembled violently as I tried to resist, but Vanessa's grip tightened. She guided my hand across the paper, forcing my signature onto the final page. Each stroke of the pen felt like a betrayal of everything I'd worked for. When I finished signing, Vanessa snatched the document away with a predatory smile spreading across her face. She carefully placed the papers into her designer leather bag, checking each page to ensure the signatures were legible and complete. Then she patted my hand with false tenderness, her touch making my skin crawl. "There now, Auntie. That wasn't so hard, was it?" Her voice had changed completely, now sweet and caring, as if the past 10 minutes of coercion had never happened. I sank back into the pillows, feeling utterly broken and defeated. My entire life's work, everything I'd built and saved for, had just been stolen by my own flesh and blood. Vanessa checked her reflection in her phone's camera, smoothing her hair and touching up her lipstick as if she'd just completed a routine errand. "I'll visit again tomorrow," she said cheerfully, loud enough for any passing nurses to hear. "You rest now. I love you so much." The words made me feel sick. As she walked out of my room, her heels clicking confidently on the linoleum floor, I closed my eyes and wondered if I'd just signed away my entire legacy to a monster. Months earlier, my life had been completely different. I was the vibrant matriarch of the Reynolds family, a woman who'd built an $800,000 legacy through decades of disciplined saving and a successful boutique real estate firm. I'd started Reynolds Properties 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a small business loan. Through hard work, long hours, and smart investments, I'd grown it into one of the most respected agencies in our county. I owned my home outright, a beautiful Victorian in the historic district that I'd lovingly restored over the years. I had substantial savings, maintained a diverse investment portfolio, and took pride in my financial independence. I'd always been proud of what I'd accomplished as a single mother after my husband passed away when Leo was just 5 years old. Raising a child alone while building a business hadn't been easy, but I'd managed both with grace and determination. Vanessa, my sister's daughter, had always been what the family politely called troubled. She'd bounced from one failed business venture to another, each time asking family members for loans she never repaid. When the doctor first said stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I felt my world tilt on its axis. The prognosis was grim, 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. I'd immediately contacted my lawyer and created a comprehensive will. The bulk of my estate would go to St. Jude Children's Hospital, an organization I'd supported for years after they'd helped a neighbor's child beat leukemia. A substantial portion would go to Leo, my beloved son who was serving his second deployment in Germany. I'd also left smaller amounts to various charities and a few dear friends who'd stood by me through thick and thin. Vanessa wasn't mentioned in the will at all. It wasn't meant to be cruel. She'd simply never been responsible with money, and I knew any inheritance would disappear within months, probably spent on another doomed business scheme or to pay off her mounting credit card debt. I wanted my life's work to do real good in the world, not finance her next failure. My lawyer had asked me several times if I was certain about excluding Vanessa, and each time I'd confirmed my decision without hesitation. Vanessa had started hovering around like a vulture the moment my diagnosis became public knowledge. She began visiting regularly, something she'd rarely done before my illness. At first, I thought perhaps my condition had reminded her of what truly mattered in life. Maybe she was finally maturing, I told myself optimistically. She'd bring flowers, magazines, and homemade soup that she claimed was made from our grandmother's recipe. She'd sit by my bedside for hours, listening to my stories about the old days, laughing at my jokes, holding my hand when the pain got bad. Other family members commented on how wonderful it was that Vanessa had stepped up during my crisis. They praised her dedication, calling her a devoted niece who was sacrificing her own time to care for me. I wanted to believe it was genuine. I wanted to think that facing my mortality had brought us closer together, that maybe she'd finally found the capacity for selflessness I'd always hoped existed within her. But there were moments when I'd catch a calculating look in her eyes, a coldness that quickly disappeared when she noticed me watching her carefully. As my condition deteriorated, I became more dependent on others for basic care. The cancer spread aggressively despite the chemotherapy and radiation treatments, and the side effects left me weak and disoriented. My doctor recommended hospitalization for palliative care when I could no longer manage at home, when even simple tasks like getting out of bed became impossibly difficult. Riverside Medical Center became my final residence, a place that smelled of bleach and sadness. Room 412 was comfortable enough, with a window overlooking a small garden where I could watch birds visit the feeders and kind nurses who checked on me regularly throughout their shifts. Vanessa visited almost every day, often staying for hours at a time. She'd dismiss other visitors, claiming I needed rest, that too many people tired me out and interfered with my recovery. She positioned herself as my primary caregiver, the one person who truly understood what I needed. The nurses began deferring to her, asking her permission before making decisions about my care. I noticed she'd started answering questions on my behalf, speaking for me even when I was fully capable of responding myself. It made me uncomfortable, but I was too weak to protest effectively. The day Vanessa brought the new will documents, I was particularly foggy from a recent increase in my morphine dosage. The pain had intensified, and my doctor had adjusted my medication to keep me comfortable. She arrived in the late afternoon, after most staff had changed shifts and the hospital was quieter with fewer people in the hallways. She carefully closed the door to my room and pulled the privacy curtain around my bed, creating a cocoon that isolated us from the outside world. "Auntie Martha, we need to talk about something important," she said, her voice serious and businesslike. She pulled out a thick stack of papers from her bag and laid them on my bedside table with a heavy thud. "I've been thinking about your will," she continued, settling into the chair beside my bed. "It's not fair that Leo gets everything when he's barely been around. He's off in Germany living his life while I'm here, taking care of you every single day, sacrificing everything." I tried to protest, to explain that Leo was serving our country with honor, but my words came out slurred and confused. Vanessa talked over me, her voice getting louder and more insistent with each passing moment. "You need to think about who's really been here for you," Vanessa pressed on, leaning forward in her chair. "I'm the one who sacrificed my time, my energy, my own life to make sure you're comfortable. Leo sends emails and makes occasional video calls. That's not real devotion. That's not real love." She pulled out the papers, flipping through them quickly with practiced efficiency. "I had a new will drawn up by a lawyer. This one is fair. This one recognizes who actually deserves your estate, who's earned it through dedication and sacrifice." I tried to focus on the documents, but the words swam before my eyes like fish in murky water. My mind felt like it was wrapped in cotton, every thought slow and difficult to grasp. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper, my throat dry and scratchy. "My will is already done. My lawyer has it filed away." Vanessa's expression hardened, her jaw clenching with barely controlled anger. "That old will doesn't reflect your current wishes. People change their minds, Auntie, especially when they realize who their true family is." The way she said true family made my skin crawl with instinctive dread. When I refused to sign, shaking my head weakly from side to side, Vanessa's mask finally slipped completely. The loving niece disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone cold and cruel. Her face contorted with rage, and she grabbed my wrist with bruising force that made me gasp in pain. "Listen to me very carefully," she snarled, her face inches from mine. "You're going to sign this document right now, or I'm going to make your last days a living hell." I stared at her in shock, unable to process this transformation, this revelation of who she truly was beneath the performance. "I have influence with the nursing staff," she continued, her voice low and threatening. "One word from me, and they'll reduce your pain medication. Do you remember what the pain was like before the morphine? That bone-deep agony that made you scream and beg for relief? You'll feel every second of it as you die, alone and abandoned." Terror flooded through me like ice water in my veins. The pain before the morphine had been unbearable, worse than anything I'd experienced in my entire life, worse than childbirth or broken bones. The thought of dying in that kind of agony was my worst nightmare, the thing I feared more than death itself. Vanessa forced the pen into my hand, her fingers wrapped tightly around mine like a vice. "Sign every page where I've marked with an X," she commanded, her voice cold and businesslike now. "Do it now, or I walk out of here and tell the nurses you're being difficult about your medication. They'll believe me. They all think I'm the devoted niece who's sacrificing everything for you." Tears streamed down my face as she guided my hand to the first signature line, my vision blurring from crying and medication. My whole body shook with fear and weakness, trembling like a leaf in a storm. I tried to pull away, to resist her control, but I had no strength left. The cancer had stolen my physical power, and the morphine had stolen my mental clarity. I was completely helpless against her, as vulnerable as a child. "That's it," Vanessa cooed, her voice suddenly gentle again as I signed the first page with a shaking hand. "Just a few more, and then you can rest. I'll make sure you're comfortable. I'll make sure the pain stays away." Page after page, she forced my signature onto the documents, each one feeling like I was signing away a piece of my soul. After I'd signed everything, Vanessa's demeanor changed instantly, like flipping a switch. She carefully organized the papers, making sure each signature was clear and legible, holding pages up to the light to verify the ink had dried properly. She even had the audacity to call in a nurse to witness the final signature, pressing the call button with a sweet smile on her face. She claimed I'd just updated my estate planning and wanted a medical professional to verify I was of sound mind when making such important decisions. The nurse, a young woman named Amy, who'd always been kind to me, glanced at the documents and then at me with concern in her eyes. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you understand what you're signing?" she asked gently, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Before I could respond, before I could find the courage to tell her the truth, Vanessa jumped in. "She's updating her will to reflect her current wishes. We discussed it when she was more alert this morning, right, Auntie?" She squeezed my hand hard under the blanket, a clear warning that sent pain shooting up my arm. I nodded weakly, too terrified to speak, too afraid of the consequences if I revealed what had really happened. The nurse signed as a witness and left, and I felt my last chance at rescue disappear with her footsteps fading down the hallway. 3 days later, I passed away in the early morning hours as the world outside still slept. The cancer had finally won its battle, and I slipped away quietly as the sun rose over the hospital garden, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd spent those final days in a haze of medication and despair, knowing what Vanessa had done, but too weak to fight back or tell anyone who might help me. Leo was still overseas, unreachable for immediate communication due to his military deployment in a remote location. The hospital staff had no idea that anything was wrong, no reason to suspect the devoted niece who sat vigil by my bedside. To them, I was simply another terminal patient being cared for by a loving family member. Vanessa had played her role perfectly until the very end, sitting by my bedside, holding my hand with false tenderness, dabbing at fake tears with expensive tissues. When I took my last breath, she waited exactly 5 minutes before calling the nurse, timing it perfectly to appear appropriately distraught. Then she called her lawyer, stepping into the hallway with a smug smile on her face. Her $800,000 payday had finally arrived, and she believed no one could stop her now that she'd gotten away with the perfect crime. My funeral was held on a gray Thursday afternoon at Riverside Memorial Chapel, the same place where we'd held services for my husband decades earlier. Leo had been granted emergency leave and arrived just in time, devastated by grief and the guilt of not being there when I passed. He'd flown for over 20 hours, changing planes 3 times to get home. Vanessa orchestrated everything, positioning herself as the chief mourner and primary family representative, making all the decisions about flowers and music. She wore an expensive designer black dress that she'd bought on a credit card, fully expecting the estate to pay it off within weeks, along with all her other accumulated debts. At the wake, she held court in the chapel's reception hall, accepting condolences and playing the grieving niece to perfection, dabbing at her eyes dramatically. Leo stood quietly to the side, overwhelmed by sorrow and jet lag, still wearing his dress uniform. He looked thin and exhausted, his eyes red from crying during the long flight home. He'd loved me deeply, and my death had hit him hard, leaving him feeling lost and alone. What made it worse was that he had no idea what Vanessa had done, what betrayal awaited him. The confrontation happened in front of the entire gathered family, dozens of relatives and friends who'd come to pay their respects. Vanessa waited until everyone was assembled in the reception hall, wanting maximum impact for her moment of triumph. She approached Leo with a folder in her hands, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, drawing everyone's attention. "Leo, we need to discuss something," she announced loudly, ensuring every person in the room could hear her clearly. "I know this is difficult timing, but there are legal matters that can't wait." Leo looked confused, his brow furrowing. "Can't this wait until after the funeral?" he asked quietly, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Vanessa shook her head, her expression falsely sympathetic. "No, it really can't. You see, Aunt Martha made some changes to her will before she passed, important changes that affect everything." She opened the folder and pulled out the documents I'd been forced to sign, holding them up for everyone to see. "She left everything to me," Vanessa declared, her voice dripping with false sympathy and barely concealed satisfaction. "The house, the business, the savings, all of it. She wanted it to go to someone who was actually there for her during her final days, someone who truly cared." The color drained from Leo's face as if someone had opened a valve. "That's impossible," he stammered, his hands beginning to shake. "Mom wouldn't do that. She told me her plans before my deployment. Everything was supposed to go to the children's hospital and to me. She was very clear about it, made me promise to honor her wishes." Vanessa smiled cruelly and waved the notarized papers in his face, close enough that he had to step back. "People change their minds, especially when they realize who their real family is. Don't bother looking for the deed to the house, Leo. Don't bother calling her lawyer about the business. Aunt Martha saw who you really were, an absent son who chose the military over his dying mother. She left it all to the one person who stayed, who sacrificed everything to be by her side, me." The gathered family members gasped and whispered among themselves, the sound filling the room like wind through leaves. Some looked at Leo with pity, others with judgment, wondering what he'd done to be written out of my will so completely. Vanessa was relishing every second of his humiliation, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Leo stood frozen, unable to process what was happening while grieving his mother's death, his world collapsing around him in the worst moment of his life. After the funeral, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He spent sleepless nights in his childhood bedroom, now feeling foreign and unwelcoming, trying to make sense of what had happened. He knew me better than anyone, understood my values and principles, and the idea that I'd completely change my will without even discussing it with him made no sense whatsoever. I'd always been open about my financial plans, always valued communication and honesty above all else. It went against everything I'd taught him about integrity and family responsibility. He decided to visit Riverside Medical Center to collect my personal belongings from the room where I'd spent my final days, hoping that somehow being there might help him understand. When he arrived at the hospital, he asked to speak with someone from the administration about the circumstances of my final days, explaining his confusion and grief. The staff directed him to the head of security, a serious man named Harold Bennett, who'd worked at Riverside for over 15 years and had a reputation for thoroughness. Harold listened sympathetically as Leo explained his suspicions about the will change, nodding occasionally and taking notes. "I know my mother," Leo said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "She wouldn't do this without talking to me first. We talked about everything. She wouldn't just cut me out." Harold studied Leo carefully, noting the genuine grief and confusion in his eyes, the obvious pain of a son who'd lost his mother. "I'm sorry for your loss, son," he said gently, his voice kind but professional. "Your mother was a kind woman. The staff all spoke highly of her, said she was gracious even when she was in terrible pain." He paused, then continued with careful deliberation. "You should know that under new 2026 patient safety protocols, all high-acuity rooms at Riverside are fitted with what we call Guardian AI cameras." Leo's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert and focused. "Cameras? You mean there's footage of her room, of her final days?" Harold nodded slowly, his expression grave. "High-definition video and audio, designed to prevent patient falls and monitor staff interactions for quality assurance and patient safety. The system also has behavioral analytics that can flag unusual interactions, patterns that suggest distress or coercion." He leaned forward in his chair. "It's all encrypted for privacy, but as next of kin and given the suspicious nature of this, can pull the logs for a legal review." For the first time since my death, Leo felt a spark of hope flickering in his chest. "Can I request that footage?" he asked urgently, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Harold's expression turned grave and serious. "With proper legal documentation and a court order, yes, we can provide everything recorded during your mother's stay." Leo immediately contacted a lawyer, explaining the situation with urgent desperation and requesting help obtaining the hospital footage. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Huang, who specialized in elder law and estate disputes, recognized the potential elder abuse case immediately. She'd seen similar situations before, though rarely with such clear evidence available. She filed a motion with the court, arguing that the circumstances of my will change warranted immediate investigation, and that the hospital security footage was crucial evidence that could prove coercion or fraud. She included Leo's testimony about my prior wishes, character references from family and friends who knew me well and could attest to my values, and documentation of Vanessa's history of financial irresponsibility and failed business ventures. The judge, moved by the suspicious timing and circumstances, granted the motion within 48 hours, unusually fast for such requests. He also issued a temporary freeze on my estate, preventing Vanessa from accessing or transferring any assets until the investigation concluded and the matter was resolved. When Vanessa received notification of the freeze via certified mail, she panicked, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. Her lawyer assured her that it was routine in contested estate cases, but she knew the truth deep in her bones. If that footage existed, if it showed what had really happened in room 412, her entire scheme would collapse like a house of cards. The footage review was scheduled for the following Monday in a conference room at Patricia Huang's law office downtown. Vanessa arrived with her lawyer, a slick man named Troy Williams, who specialized in estate law and had a reputation for bending ethical rules when it served his client's interests. She wore another expensive outfit, projecting confidence she didn't actually feel, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her designer handbag. Her strategy was to claim that any conversation caught on camera was just normal end-of-life planning, that I'd been lucid and willing when I signed the new will, fully aware of my decisions. Leo sat across from her at the long conference table, flanked by Patricia and Harold Bennett from the hospital security department. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Patricia had set up a large monitor on the wall and connected it to an encrypted laptop containing the hospital footage, the screen currently blank and black. "Before we begin," she announced formally, "I want to note that this footage is being reviewed under court order and will be preserved as evidence in potential legal proceedings. Everything we see here today is confidential and protected." Troy Williams nodded, looking bored and checking his expensive watch. Vanessa's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure, sitting rigidly in her chair. Patricia pressed play, and the room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. The footage was stunning in its clarity. 4K resolution with crystal-clear audio that captured every word, every expression, every moment of Vanessa's betrayal in excruciating detail. We watched as Vanessa entered my room, her face transforming from the concerned niece to the predatory thief within seconds of closing the door behind her. We heard her threaten to stop my morphine, watched her force the pen into my trembling hand with bruising grip, saw the tears streaming down my face as she coerced signature after signature from my weakened body. The behavioral analytics system had flagged the interaction automatically, highlighting stress markers in my vital signs. Elevated heart rate, increased blood pressure, and unusual behavior patterns in Vanessa that suggested aggression and coercion. When the footage showed her calling in Nurse Amy to witness the final signature, her manipulation was even more evident. The contrast between her threatening whispers and her sweet public voice stark and chilling. The camera captured the hard squeeze she gave my hand under the blanket, the warning in her eyes that kept me silent. Troy Williams's confident expression had crumbled completely, his face ashen. Vanessa sat frozen like a statue, her face pale as paper, knowing her lies were exposed and her scheme had failed. The aftermath was swift and brutal, unfolding with the efficiency of justice finally served. Patricia immediately contacted the district attorney's office, providing them with copies of the footage and a detailed summary of the case. Because Vanessa had positioned herself as my caregiver, she was legally considered a mandated reporter with a duty to protect me, not exploit me for personal gain. Her actions constituted elder financial abuse, a level 6 felony under current state law with serious penalties. The DA moved quickly, recognizing the strength of the evidence and the clear nature of the crime. Within a week, criminal charges were filed against Vanessa. Elder financial abuse, coercion, fraud, and exploitation of an incapacitated person. Each charge carried potential prison time ranging from 5 to 10 years. The judge also issued an emergency order invalidating the coerced will and restoring my original estate plan exactly as I'd intended it. Under a new 2026 state law designed to prevent exactly this type of exploitation of vulnerable adults, the court could immediately freeze and redirect assets in proven elder abuse cases, preventing perpetrators from benefiting from their crimes in any way, ensuring they couldn't spend or hide stolen money while legal proceedings continued. The legal conference room became a courtroom of sorts for Vanessa's final humiliation and downfall. After reviewing the complete footage multiple times, analyzing every frame and word, Patricia slid a document across the polished table to Troy Williams. "Your client has 2 options," she stated coldly, her voice devoid of sympathy. "She can plead guilty to all charges and cooperate fully with asset recovery, or she can fight this in court and face maximum sentences on every count. I guarantee the jury will be shown this footage in its entirety." Troy reviewed the document, his hand shaking slightly, then leaned over to whisper frantically with Vanessa, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Her designer dress suddenly seemed absurd, a costume of greed that the invisible witness in the corner of room 412 had thoroughly documented for posterity. She'd spent thousands of dollars she didn't have on clothes, jewelry, and luxury items, anticipating an inheritance that would never come, that was never rightfully hers. Now she faced prison time, complete financial ruin, and the permanent stain of elder abuse on her record that would follow her forever. "My client needs time to consider her options," Troy said weakly, his voice lacking conviction. Patricia shook her head firmly. "She has 24 hours to decide. After that, we proceed to trial, and I guarantee the DA will seek maximum sentences on every charge. That footage will be shown to a jury, to the media, to everyone. Vanessa chose to plead guilty, hoping for a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation and showing remorse. The sentencing hearing was held 6 weeks later in a packed courtroom filled with family members, reporters, and curious onlookers who'd followed the case. Leo gave a victim impact statement, his voice steady but emotional, describing the pain of losing his mother and then discovering how she'd been abused in her final days by someone she'd trusted. Character witnesses testified about my kindness, my integrity, and my clear wishes for my estate to benefit children's hospitals and charitable causes. The judge listened carefully to all the evidence before pronouncing sentence, his expression stern and disapproving. This court finds the defendant's actions particularly heinous, he stated firmly, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. She exploited a dying woman's fear and pain for personal financial gain. She violated the most sacred bonds of family and trust, preying on someone in their most vulnerable moment. Vanessa was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole, the maximum sentence possible. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for all legal costs incurred in recovering the estate. As bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, her designer dress a mockery of the wealth she'd tried to steal. She looked broken and small, nothing like the confident predator who'd entered my hospital room months earlier. My estate was fully restored to its original distribution, exactly as I'd intended. St. Jude Children's Hospital received their bequest of $400,000, which they used to fund a new oncology wing named in my honor. Leo received his inheritance of $300,000, which he used to establish the Martha Reynolds Foundation, supporting military families dealing with medical crises. He also took over Reynolds Properties, honoring my legacy by running the business with the same integrity I'd valued throughout my career. The hospital used the case to improve their guardian systems, training staff to recognize signs of elder exploitation, and implementing additional safeguards for vulnerable patients. Harold Bennett gave presentations at healthcare conferences across the country, explaining how the Guardian AI system had protected me when I couldn't protect myself, becoming an advocate for similar systems nationwide. As for me, though I'm gone, I rest peacefully knowing that justice prevailed. That small camera in room 412, barely noticeable against the white ceiling tiles, had been my invisible witness. It captured the truth when I couldn't speak it, protected my wishes when I was too weak to defend them, and ensured that my life's work went to those I'd chosen to help. In the end, that $800,000 betrayal was toppled not by chance, but by technology designed to protect the most vulnerable among us. Vanessa thought she'd gotten away with the perfect crime, but she never counted on the invisible witness that never blinks, never forgets, and never lies. The Guardian AI system that recorded every moment of her cruelty became the most important testimony in a case that changed elder care protection laws across multiple states.